I'm your host, Laura Nichols, and this is a note from your coach, from me, Queen of the Pivot, to you, badass human. This show is designed as a quick dose of unfiltered motivation to empower you to create the life you want to be living, one of authenticity and alignment. It investigates the power of the pivot and helps create understanding of the human journey, all while sharing tales of pivots from my sometimes ridiculous human experience, as well as my 20 years of experience in working with other humans on growth and change. If you are interested in leveling up your life, stay tuned. A note from your coach starts now. Hello, my loves. Welcome back. This is episode 10. Very exciting. I feel like that should be special or something, like almost like a 10th anniversary. But you're listening to Notes from Your Coach on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with me for the next hour, and like usual, I'm going to help you ignite your life with unfiltered motivation. It will likely be very unfiltered today. Each first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard, I'll be discussing some small but potent nuggets of truth from my book, Notes from Your Coach, to help you create the life you want to be living. So, as we do every week, we select a quote from the book, and that's what we're going to talk about. And when I have guests, I like to let them choose the quotes. A lot of times they are people who already have the book, have read it, using it, and this week is no exception. We're going to be talking about the quote, "You can wait for opportunities to come to you, or you can create opportunities that you want." And we're going to dive into the truth of all of that. And, we all have had that moment where we're like sitting on the couch and waiting for life to just like deliver us success, like it's Uber Eats. But that's not how things work. So we're going to talk a lot about today about manifesting goals, how our brains work, etc. And for that, I have asked my beautiful friend Kat to come on and give us her wisdom on this. So from an expert standpoint, Kat is a owner of a full service marketing firm. She works with businesses to grow and scale using strategy, engagement, design, and organic marketing. She has been a business owner since 2007, I believe, right? And she also has her doctorate. She's a smarty pants. She has a team and she works really hard to build strong relationships. Also, on a side note, I know Kat from a personal level, and I've gotten to know her really, really well over the last couple of years, because not only has she been my client, but in a lot of ways, she's also been my teacher. We just came back from a workshop, or actually a women's retreat, where we spent the whole weekend sort of diving into goal setting, the resistance that comes from that, taking down some of those issues that are going to pop up and getting really deep into the nitty gritty of things. And so I thought, who better to come on and talk about goal setting than Kat? So thank you for coming on, Kat. I really appreciate you for jumping on and being here with me today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah. Okay, you are, in my mind, somebody who does this really well. You have this really beautiful relationship between manifestation and goal setting to sort of create the life you want to be living. And that's sort of what, like, you know, for me, that's what life coaching is all about, creating a life you want to be living. So for you, I'm curious to know what this quote really means to you. So the quote that we're working with today is, you can wait for opportunities to come to you, or you can create the opportunities that you want. So what does this quote mean to you, and how has it played a role in your own life?
Hey, that's a great question on there. For me, it started off kind of dissecting what I thought like hope, wish, dream, manifest wasn't enough. Kind of that journey of desire. Like I want something different, but I hope like that fleeting thought that I'm going to get it, or I wish a little more specific attempt, really terrible attempt at manifestation, or a dream. Like I had a detailed accounting of where I was going to go and the vivid details about it. And then we have that manifestation piece. And this was something kind of later on in life that I was learning about, but manifest being in the noun, what's clear and obvious to the mind and the eye. Okay. But manifesting is from a neuroscience point of view. And so if we look at it from a verb, from a neuroscience point of view, it's basically we're just rewiring the brain to subconsciously pursue our goal or desire. And I think where I want to explain, I got into this place where I started to believe, oh, yeah, that's it, right? Just positive thinking, I'm going to get there. Except it was like, again, sitting on the couch waiting for Uber Eats to come. And I'm like, oh, like I'm excited. What are they bringing? But I didn't order or pay, so we got a problem. And so I began to really look at how the subconscious and the conscious had to work together to be able to achieve this. And that really kind of moved things into goals, maps, and what we call the grind. Um, so just basically making the subconscious and conscious work together in that realm.
Yeah, I love that. And we're definitely going to dive into neuroplasticity and conscious versus subconscious and all that as we go deeper into the episode. But I want to highlight something that you said that I think is so important. And if we're going to use the metaphor of Uber Eats, right? Yes, you can sit on the couch, order Uber Eats, but the key thing that you said that I think is really important is that you have to have the money to pay for it, right? And I think that's where the grind comes in. So we have our hopes and our dreams, our wishful thinking, if you will, but you gotta have the money to pay the piper, right? And so that comes from the intentional planning and then intentional action of meeting those dreams slash goals, right? And putting together your dreams and goals together. And so I think that that is a really important piece of what manifesting is. And I love to get your thoughts on that piece of it.
I think, so I don't know what's taught in schools right now, but I know one of the things that we were taught was SMART goals, right? Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? Is it relevant? Is it time oriented? And then people are like, okay, great. I've set my goal. I'm good to go. And I think the problem is when we don't dive in and say, do we have the skills to achieve this goal? And do we have the resources to achieve this goal? If we don't check those out first, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And I know that comes into the attainable and realistic, but I think the problem is people map this out and don't consider where they're at currently in their journey. So
Yeah,
that journey
I,
could take us way down the line, but if we don't know exactly where we are on the map right when we make that.
I love that you're pointing that out. And so I think we did a lot of work on this in the retreat that we just had, right? And getting a clear picture before you even set the goals of like where you currently are. Because sometimes, and we talked about this before, you and I have, sometimes people make goals and they don't stick to it. And the reality is it's because they didn't actually really want it in the first place. And so that reflection piece that you're speaking about is really important. So if we're talking to somebody who's like, yes, I have these goals. Like I'm like good to go. What would you suggest in terms of reflection? Like what has been something that's really helped you to decide if you have the skills, if you have the resources necessary to start to move towards these goals that you're setting for yourself?
Absolutely. I do a lot of mapping out. So if there's something that I'm wanting, let's just take, for example, I opened another business this past year, Lillington Co-working. I talked to you extensively about it. It was one of those things that it was when you're evaluating, is that what I really want? Or is it because somebody planted that there and I'm thinking, oh, that sounds really cool to have, but do I really want it? And that's the other piece. So I had to kind of look at stuff. Do I have the monetary resources to do it? Do I have the ability to do what's needed to do within that? Can I run it? Can I set up a website? Can I get the marketing done? Can I do all of these things? And so a lot of times you're thinking about all the things that you can do, but you neglect the pieces that you might not know how to do, and you might not know that you don't know. So what I did was I went out and I said, let me go interview two other co-working owners, people who have been there, done that, all the good, the bad, the ugly, right? Like just lay it on me, and one shared with me, like I really thought, open workspaces were going to be my bread and butter, and I lost my rear. And I was going, uh-oh, because that was what I was envisioning, right? I was like, oh, I'm going to have all these little desks beside each other, and each one's going to have like a little different theme and move through. And I was like, okay, scratch that off. I was like, all right, I'm learning. I'm learning what is good, what's not. I didn't know. I had this grandiose idea of what I thought was going to work. So I kind of feel like it's all the research we used to get told to do in middle and high school, right? It's the digging deeper beyond the surface level of what we have to do to find out the things that we might not know we don't know. And that's the hard part sometimes is to put that much pre-work in to make sure that our post work is not, or our work to get there is not as hard.
Yeah, and I love that because I think knowing a lot of entrepreneurs and knowing a lot of people who are dreamers, that is sort of a deficit sometimes, right? Like there's a lot of high in the sky, I'm gonna do this thing. And to some extent, there is a little bit of a jumping off, right? But what you're talking about is jumping, but also knowing sort of how you're gonna fall, like how you're gonna like fly and sort of doing the work ahead of time to sort of feel that out. It almost, if we're going to take the metaphor of Uber Eats again, it's almost like really researching, do I want to do DoorDash, Uber Eats, or like who am I ordering this from? And doing the groundwork to understand like exactly if this is even beneficial for you in like the first place. And I love this idea of the pre-planning, and it's just something that you are so good at. And I also think that something that's really important is to consciously think of things because what the interesting relationship between conscious and subconscious as far as manifesting and goal planning goes is sort of what we're going to be diving into in the next piece of it. And the conscious planning actually comes from our original subconscious. And so your brain has already done this pre-work that you don't even know about to get you to a place where you're looking into how to do this goal if this is something you're interested in. And so what I would argue is that that spark that, oh, do I want to do this? Your brain's already given you the idea of like, yes, look into this, whether you end up doing it or not, but the subconscious has already sort of made that decision for you. And so that's sort of what we're going to dive into in the next section. We're going to take a real quick break, and then we're going to talk about the science behind manifesting and how it connects to our brain processes and what that looks like. So stick around. You don't want to miss this. We'll be right back. All right, my loves, welcome back to Notes from Your Coach. We are going to be talking about how manifesting works with our brain, the neuroscience behind it. You know, a lot of times there's people who are kind of woo-woo about manifesting, right? Like throw it out there, spend time thinking about it, focus on it, do affirmations, like really, and then it will just come. Now, that is a very important piece of it. But you don't have to think it's like this magical thing because it's actually incredibly scientific, right? And when I learned about the reticular activating system, my mind was blown because I was already sold on the woo-woo part of it, right? Like focus on this, like spending energy putting into like I'm building this business or I'm getting this dream job or, you know, like focusing on a goal. But when I understood why it works from a neuroscience standpoint, it was a game changer for me. So for those of you who don't know what the RAS is, when I'm saying it's RAS, it's called the reticular activating system. And it is a portion of our brain that's sort of like a filter. You know, we, in any given situation, if you're looking around your room, there are thousands of, we'll just get geeky and call them data points, right? That your brain could be taking in and interpreting. Well, our brains aren't that smart in the sense that they can't really take in all of that at one time. And so the RAS is the filter that tells our brain what is important. So, for instance, my favorite um, example of this is we've all had this experience where you want to buy something. Let's say you're really you got your heart set on, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of a car, like a Honda Accord, right? When you decide that you're like, I might be interested in a Honda Accord, you will start seeing that car everywhere, right? It happened when I was like going to name my babies a certain name that I thought was really unique, and all of a sudden I started hearing them everywhere. The reality is there weren't more Honda Accords. There weren't more babies named that. It's just that my brain decided through the RAS that that was important information for me to have. And so that is why our brains, why manifestation works. The things that we spend time focused on is we're training our brains, telling them that it is important, right? It's sort of like Google for your life, right? So do you know about the RAS? We've talked about this like before. What do you think people misunderstand most about the science behind manifesting and like the neuroscience behind it?
I think there's several things. One being you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? They always say, I'm too old for that. I can't change, right? If you want to, you can. That's kind of the crazy part, right? So that's where it starts to sound woo-woo to people. I think the fallacy comes in is when people are like, manifestation is enough. I'm going to think positively enough to do this. I think that I am going to really root this in. I'm going to change my pathways. And because I'm changing my pathways, then this physical thing's going to happen. Um, I think this is where people get into trouble. And there's been a ton of studies done about this. One of my favorite ones to follow is Stanford professor James Doty or Doty. I'm not sure. Southernism happens here, but he's a neuroscientist and a neurosurgeon. So I think he qualifies as 100% nerd that we can rely on for accurate information here. He's from Stanford, but he has
Yeah,
studied this.
he's an expert. He's an expert of sorts,
Yeah,
right?
that's it. He is a good guy to look at this, and he even wrote a book, Mind Magic, basically stating, there are new pathways we can create, and then people still go, but is it enough? No, no, it isn't. Like, you can't be Pollyanna walking around all the time. Like, Uber Eats is going to deliver me a pizza here in a minute. Like, can I just look out my window and cross my fingers that it happens? Number one, I live like 30 minutes from the closest town down a dirt road that's a mile long. I mean, how long do I have to keep manifesting this pizza to come down here for it to happen?
You just gotta sit there all day, Kat, and think about it,
That's
and it's gonna
it.
work.
That's it. It's not.
Right. And no, and that is something that I work with my clients a lot on, right? Like when we're talking about creating new neural pathways. And when I'm talking about that, when I'm saying manifestation, there is science, obviously, the RAS behind like being able to picture yourself. Let's say the goal is a new business, right? Like spending time picturing yourself, what the business looks like as a successful business person, really emotionally getting into what your day-to-day looks like, right? That's the part where that's where it begins, right? That is where your reticular activating system goes ding, right? It's like that's when you start meeting people who might be able to help you. You start hearing things that you're like, oh, that's a good idea that you hadn't thought of before. And that's when the RAS starts to kick in. And at the same time that that's happening, you also then start taking those action steps, right? So you're supporting your brain. Your brain is doing that thing where it's starting to create new neural pathways, and you're taking the action where that is supporting that. And the thing about neural pathway creation is that it's not quick and easy. It's like you're looking at a forest and there's a trail, right? And it's a trail that's been there for 40 years. I'll say 45. I just turned 45. And you want to make that change. It's going to take time to walk that path over and over and over again to make that neural pathway change. And so it's not magic in the sense that it's quick. It's magic in the sense that you can do this until the day you die. That's where I think it's really amazing, right? That like we have neuroplasticity until until we're done. Like you live to 105, you could do this until 105. And so when you say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, that's where we know it's like simply not true, right? Have you ever had the experience where you've really used visualization and it's benefited you? And like what did that look like for you?
Absolutely. And there's been a couple of, well, not even a couple, like that is part of the process of what I go through every year when I'm laying out goals. I am looking at, can I envision myself there? Can I put myself in that? And I'm gonna use this Lillington co-working space. So we didn't start last year looking at it. Like it was just started last year as a business, but 3 years ago, I said, I think I am ready to have an office again. Um, Maybe it was 4 years ago. Oof, that post-COVID time frame is a little wonky there.
For
Um,
sure.
but yeah, I think it was about 4 years ago. I said, you know what? I want my own office space again for my marketing business. I was like, but I don't need anything big because most of my team's remote. So if most of my team is remote and I still want something, what's another way that I can do that and have something that's helpful to the community, but also fills my cup? And I had this opportunity to go into a co-working space and I got to thinking and I was like, could I see myself doing that? And I'm asking myself that. And I did look at a building originally that we were going to purchase. Um, Actually brought in a contractor, like we're going through and we're visualizing, and I'm going in each room and I'm sitting in my brain in the desk that's going to be there, what the space visually looks like, how that's going to provide safety for me to have that office so that I don't have so much outflow of cash that is tied up in real estate. Just all the different things that you're having to think and visualize through and look and say, is this possible for me to visualize myself doing that? And in contrast, I can give you another. Um, I said I was going to write a book on, right, on the process of goal setting. And I never could quite see that in my brain doing that. Like it was very difficult for me to envision me sitting in front of a computer writing, although I'm sitting in front of a computer all the time typing, right? But I was not ever writing a book about that. The problem with that goal was that that was not what I really wanted. I wanted to create a workbook for people. I didn't want to write a book. There's a difference. There's a big difference, right? A workbook book
Yeah.
versus a book is a big, big difference. Um, and so once I tweaked my goal a little bit to a workbook, I was like, oh, I could see me designing graphics and being able to pull these in and doing this and expanding what we were doing with G3, which was the women's retreat that we've been doing for about 7 years, and taking that and kind of expanding. We had like this little shrimpy 3 to 5 pages that we were working on. And then you get a booklet that's 75 pages at this
Oh
point in
yeah,
time.
it's robust. I love
Uh,
it.
right. So we've made it to that point of being able to envision it and envision that you want to walk through that journey of desire and turning it into the conscious level.
You want to know what's so interesting about you describing this? And just for the audience, I know all of this already, but I still love hearing Kat talk about it. Your energy completely shifted when you talked about writing a book about goal setting. You're just like, yeah, versus this beautiful workbook that you've created and the language that you talked about in creating and what it looked like. And you could just hear the shift of energy in your voice. And I think that what you're pointing out is so important when it comes to manifestation, your Raz, you have to be able to lay that mental blueprint. And for you, that blueprint was not coming when you're talking about writing a book on goal setting. You're like, write a book on goal setting. But when you started talking about writing your workbook and taking somebody through the process of goal setting and what that looks like and the exercises you put into your workbook, it completely changed in the way you talked about it. And so I think it's really important to remember that manifesting, again, it's not magic, but it's an alignment of your mindset, it's an alignment of your focus and your actions. And most importantly, what you really want. And sometimes we get squirrel brain or we're like, I could do that, or I could do that, I could do that. But it has to be in true alignment of who you are. And, when you were telling the story about the co-working station, it made me realize that like I so for everyone who doesn't know this, I was a school counselor for a really long time. I started a business, and most people don't know this, but I actually went back to school counseling and I'm running my business separately. But I looked at being an entrepreneur years ago. I didn't think about this until you were just talking about it, but my brain was already setting the stage for this is something that you want. There is an alignment with the entrepreneurial spirit. Now, ultimately, I didn't go down that path of that business from years ago, But my brain was already connected. I was already aligned with this idea of owning a business, like building something from the ground up, sort of being my own boss and like what that looked like. And so it's really interesting that sometimes these blueprints can take years to develop and tweaking and editing and what they really look like. And I think that that is really important to know that sometimes we have an idea or a thought, but it may take a while for it to come up like or come to fruition. Um, so we're gonna take another break. You guys are listening to Notes from Your Coach. And when we come back, we're gonna talk about what it looks like to have the relationship between manifestation and setting clear, actionable goals, which this is like cat's bread and butter. So I'm really excited to get back and talk about that. And so we'll be right back. All right, my loves, welcome back to Notes from Your Coach. Today we are talking about creating opportunities or waiting for them to come to you. Clearly, we are on the side of creating the opportunities because really, when we talk about living the life we want, that's when things happen, right? Things aren't just going to come to you and what that looks like. So, we're going to talk about the connection between manifestation and setting the clear, actionable goals. And that to back up, that has a lot to do with how the neuroscience works and why setting the clear and actionable goals then continues to propel the RAS to give you the things to let you see the things you need for these goals. But before we go there, I really would love, Kat, I'd love for people to know sort of what you do, like how like if they wanted to reach out to you and work with you, like what that would look like. So like what do you feel like you want people to know about who you are, what you do, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Well, two things. I think we have cup fillers in everything that we do, and so I'm going to talk about my cup filler and my real life. My real life being the owner of a marketing firm. We take care of everything from websites to social media to PR presence, and we also have a division with Prison PR that does crisis management. So if you get kind of in a pickle, had some bad reps stuff going on, we can take care of that. But the cup filler being that I have a group that I founded called G3, and it's Women of Strategy. And we work together to go through goals. And this is something that we do throughout the year. It's a group on Facebook that any woman can join. And you don't have to be a business owner to join it. It's for anybody that actually has a goal of any part, which I would hope would be everybody, but maybe it's not yet because they haven't watched this episode fully yet. But once they watch this episode, they're going to have to. They're going to have to be like, I've got to do this. And this group is something that I'm super passionate about. And it's just funny how it dovetails into the stuff that I do with marketing already, because when we work with the business, we strategize, we talk about the resources they have, the skills that they have, all the things that they want to do, where they're at now. Do they have the ability to do they desire to do that? Because a lot of people come and they're like, I want to grow to a seven-figure business. I want to grow to this. Is that what you really want? Like, and for some, that answer is no. But if we don't answer the question, is that what you really want? Like, what do you really desire? Like, when you think back on last year and you look back, what were your best memories? What did you have zero regrets about? What did you were like, absolutely, I'm grateful for that. I'm doing it again. Versus, did you have regrets for any of it? And if you start to see patterns in that look back, that can also help you looking forward to know maybe I don't really desire it, or maybe that's not really filling my cup. It's not really something I want to do. I don't know why I keep writing this book on my list 3 years in a row, y'all. It took me 3 years in a row of writing this book on my list, and then being at the end of the year, like, why didn't I do it? Like, I could have just written it. I could have just sat down and done it, but I didn't want it. So it didn't matter.
Right. That was not like we talked last week about resistance. That was not resistance to overcome because you really didn't
Right.
want. to do it. So you're
No.
like, look, you're working doubly uphill to do that. So if women want to join G3, how do they do that?
If you go out on Facebook and you look up G3 Women of Strategy, it is a group, it's a private group. You just request to join on there. Obviously, you have to be 18 and up. Sometimes things can come up in adult life that we want to make sure that we're not sharing with children on there. So 18 and up is required. And of course, what happens within the walls of that stays within the walls of that is kindness rules. We're all about good humans and being kind to one another. So if you're able to do that and set goals, come on over.
Yeah, and if you want to, we can also link it in the show notes, and so people can find it that way
Perfect.
as well. And obviously, I am a member of the group. It's very helpful, and it's really good to be connected to like-minded women who are about creating the life they want and what that looks like. So we will definitely link it below. And so I love this because that is something that fills your cup, which is, of course, why I brought you on to talk about this. And I think when we're talking about manifestation, it's really important to understand what the role of goals are in that. Like, I think manifestation is the spark, but goals are really the fuel, right? But you need both
Yep.
to keep going, right? You need to have the spark, which is the workbook, right? In your instance. And then
Hmm.
you have to have the goals to continue going. Like, what am I doing this week? What am I doing this month? What does 6 months look like? What does a year out look like? So earlier you mentioned um, SMART goals, and not everyone understands that. So I really think it's important to lay that out because it's when you're setting goals, doing it as a SMART goal is really important. And of course, when we're talking about a SMART goal, it's an acronym, right? So the S stands for specific, the M stands for measurable, the A is achievable, the R is relevant, and the T is time bound. And that is important because it really breaks down your goal so that you can't really skirt around it. Like you have all the information there that you need to take action because you've sifted through the specific, the measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound, right? So, how do clear goals help you manifest opportunities in your life?
Well, I think let's just give an example, right? So I will hear people say, I'm going to have better health this year. Okay. Like,
Sure. Like haven't we all at some point set
right.
a really unclear goal, right?
Yeah. Or I want to grow my business, or I want to just do big things. Okay. Let's drill down a little bit. Let's take health, for example. And I'm going to just go into something that I think is super important. So I'm going to talk about sleep for a minute.
Oh yeah.
And
Cat's
yeah,
always getting on me for not sleeping enough.
yes, I will tell somebody to join me at my 8:30 old people bedtime. I will say, come on with me. But one of the participants a couple of years back was like, I need to prioritize sleep. And that's my
Great.
goal.
Right. Like you're like,
And I was
great.
like, what does
And
that mean?
what
What
does
does
that
that mean?
actually mean? Right.
Right. And she was like, well, I got to quit staying up reading late, and I got to quit watching programs late. And and I was like, stop. How many hours of sleep do you need? Oh, I don't know about that. I just meant like I needed to prioritize it a little bit more. And I was like, no, 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 no. Let's keep going. Like, so you're telling me that you can obviously tell you're robbing yourself of that you need. So what would be the minimum that we're going to work toward? I don't want to quantify that. That's going to put me on, like I said, do you want it or not? Like, I mean, this is really where you get down to it. Is this something you desire, or is this just something you
That
heard?
so that sounds like the spark to me. The spark is I'd like to get more sleep, right? There's
Yeah.
obviously
Hmm.
something there. Like, okay, so then there's the why, right? So then the SMART goal that comes in, that's the fuel. So these questions that you're asking lead to the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. So what, like, lead me in this acronym for that
Right.
specific goal.
So getting really specific has to be measurable. So how many hours are you going to do? What can you commit to? Is 6 enough? Is 7 enough? Is 8 enough? Could we just start with 7? Would that be
Kat says
okay?
no. So by the way, Kat says no, 6 is not enough. Because I
It is
asked that
not,
question.
according to research, and this is not Kat's research. This is neuroscience research that talks about how important this is. And just for context, I worked on a research team doing a lot of this research. So yes, I can speak to it. No, I'm not an expert in it, but yes, I had to do a lot of research into that, the Oura Ring, a lot of different other things that track sleep, and realizing how important it is. And really, the reason that this person was saying, I need to get more sleep, was they were discovering that they felt sluggish, that they had all these sort of symptoms that have come along with it. And the key that they had identified was sleep. So they were really desiring to change this. So we got really specific in there and saying 7 hours. But then I went a little bit further. Is this even realistic? I mean, are you going to get in bed? Are you going to turn the light out? Are you going, how are you going to do this? I mean,
Which
what's going to change?
sometimes people you say the R is instead of relevant is realistic. So that is appropriate. Is it realistic to
Yeah.
say 7 hours? Right.
Yeah.
And
If you get
then,
off of work at 9 and you have
right.
to go in to work at 4 a.m., can you
Oh,
do
that
that?
sounds like you need to change some things up. Hire
That's
a life
it.
coach, and we're going to work on that
That's
together.
it.
What,
That's
so then in this instance, what would be the measure? Like, how would they measure this?
like the hours of sleep that they're getting. And it's even, you know, I take it even further than the specific, the measurable. I take it beyond that, because what's going to happen is you're going to have roadblocks. You're going to have things that come up. And yes, if they're the exception, no biggie, right? A friend calls, or you're out at a G3 retreat and you stay up till 10 o'clock, you know, which right now sounds absolutely horrid to me. But a couple of years back, I would have been like, y'all, I can make it till 2:30 or 3. Let's keep going, right? Not
We
anymore.
did keep you up. We did keep you up a little later that
Yes,
weekend.
proof I
You
can
did
do it
stay
if
up.
I want to.
Yes. Yes.
That's it. So we dive a little deeper than that and asking what behaviors are going to change as a result of this. So now that we've defined how specific we're going to get 7 hours of sleep a night. You can't stop there, because if you just stop there, if it were that easy, you'd have already done it.
Yeah, and I think this is where breaking things down into smaller steps is important, right? Like it may be for this person that all of a sudden getting 7 hours of sleep sounds ideal. And like, yes, they want to make that, and that's the end game. But it might be that right now they're getting five. And so a small actionable step would be okay, you know what? I'm going to aim for 5.5 this week. What do I need to do to make that happen? Right. And so you're taking the smaller actionable steps to reach this bigger goal. So you're breaking it
That's
down
it.
into smaller pieces. And I think that sometimes people I get a lot of resistance from my clients who I do like a lot of mini goals, right? Because we want to have success. And a lot of times
Oh,
what will
yeah.
happen is somebody will not meet that, like 7 hour sleep goal and they're like, well, I'm out, right? And so
Throw it out.
creating, right, exactly. When you're not feeling successful, it doesn't feel good. And so creating smaller actionable steps and then as you're suggesting, reassessing them and redefining them as you go. Is this still something I want to do? Is super important. And gosh, I want to talk more about this, but I am aware that we need to take another break. So we are going to take a quick break. You guys are listening to Notes from Your Coach with Laura and Kat. And we will be right back. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to dive more into this and then talk to inspired action and what that looks like. So we'll be right back. All right, my loves, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with Laura, the Queen of the Pivot, and we are still diving into and dissecting what manifestation looks like when it comes to goal setting and the relationship between the two. And before the break, we were talking about taking smaller actionable steps with the idea, and part of the reason for doing that is because you're really working hard to build a relationship with yourself. Because a lot of times, we will go to bat for somebody else 100 times over and we'll be the first ones to like not do something for ourselves. And so what that does over time is it really erodes our relationship with ourselves. And so micro goals, small steps, you're also starting to rebuild that relationship that you have with yourself and taking ownership of your journey. And that is a really important piece of this here. And so when we're talking about setting goals, taking action, changing the neuroscience of your brain, the neural pathways, it's really important to be thinking about the relationship. So when we're talking about these opportunities that we're creating for ourselves rather than waiting for it to come to you, um, I'm curious to know in your own life, what can you give me an example of that? Like, where have you said, I'm not going to wait for this, I'm going to create for this, I'm going to make this happen?
Oh, wow. Well, can I go back to the Lillington co-working? I mean, I could have just kept
Yeah.
sitting on it. I could have kept on. And and in fact, when I was your client, it was coming up again. There was this opportunity that had presented itself. It's been sitting back here in the back of my mind. I'm seeing all these different spaces pop up. Why? Because of RAS. I'm seeing all the different spaces that are becoming available. And unless I call or do anything for it, nothing's going to happen. Unless I change my behavior of what I'm doing, it will still be static on the same. So it was knowing that I had to pick up the phone to do that. I had to make that first step. But the problem was that fear, which is something we all experience, was kind of paralyzing me. What we call the analysis paralysis, where you're sitting there and you have so much coming in that you're just like, I won't do anything, which is also a decision in itself, but helpful for me to say, what's the worst thing that could have happened?
Yeah, I love that question. What's the worst thing that can happen? Because a lot of times it's a super easy question, but I use it with my clients a lot because a lot of times once they go down the rabbit hole of the worst thing, they realize, oh heck, it's actually not that bad. Like, what if
Yeah.
the answer is no? Okay, so you figure out another answer, right? Like, and so that is a super helpful technique, to use when you're faced to like sitting in that fear. And like, listen, fear's super normal, right? Our brain uses it because it wants to keep us safe. It doesn't want us having dreams and following dreams and doing this because our brain, first and foremost, cares about safety, not creating the life we want to live. And I think that little nugget, I preach on it all the time because I think it's really important to understand that about our brains, that it doesn't want to manifest. It doesn't like it can dream, but because dreaming is not the same as taking action, it could sit in dreamland forever. Your brain is perfectly happy there because you're safe. But when you start taking action, that is when your brain starts to give you that resistance. And here's the thing, in order to get over the fear, you just have to take action, right? Because taking action is what then builds the confidence. And again, going back to the creating micro goals, that's why we do that. Because the more steps you take for you, the more phone calls you take about these spaces. Is this available? What does it look like? You setting up meetings with people who already own these spaces, the more action you take, the more you're telling yourself, hey, you know what? I got this. I can do these hard things. And that also then also creates momentum and it opens new doors. And so I think it's really important to recognize that manifesting isn't passive, right? It's showing up, it's taking risks, and it's putting yourself in the path of possibility. Because again, that's where your RAS comes in and it starts showing you possibilities that were already there, but your brain is filtering them so that you see them. And that's why it's just this sort of like back and forth between, you know, brain action, seeing things, taking action. And it's this constant thing that we sort of go back and forth between. When you start creating opportunities, you stop feeling like life is really just happening to you, and you start feeling like life is happening for you. But the reality is, it's happening for you because you're doing the work, right? Um, and
Putting
I
in.
know yeah, we talk a lot about sort of what comes when you come up against the roadblock. And you are really good at sort of diving deep and like digging through that. And so I'd love to hear your perspective on that, the hard questions that you like to
Oh,
ask
yeah.
people.
I do like to dig in deep, right? So we got that specific stuff, but what's prevented you from doing it until now? If you've said the phone and the Kindle, are they not still going to exist even after you write down 7 hours? Like, so what are you going to do? And what we did is ask, say, are you going to keep it right next to you? Because again, we've got that one neuro pathway that basically, as we lay down in the bed, we pick up the phone, it's right there in our hand, and we start the scroll hole, right? We're committed. And our brain at that point in time is just taking over and it's doing the thing. This is a very safe activity. I can do this for hours and we're going to rob you of sleep and it feels good.
Right,
Getting
because you get
all
that you get that cheap dopamine
hit.
hit, right?
Yeah, all those little hits, right? So it's what are you going to do differently? What resources do you need? Do you need to move the phone to another room, the Kindle to another room? Do you need to lock it? I even looked at this little device called a brick where you scan your phone in another room, you leave the brick attached in there, and it puts it into this focus mode, one that you can't change, which is different from like iPhone or Android, where it allows you to change it when you just get tired of your own little parameters you set up, because that happens. Um,
Oh
but
yeah,
I
when you
looked at
like
these
when
things.
I think I've done where like you can only use Facebook or whatever for,
1 hour.
10 minutes and then you're like, "Oh, I'm just gonna stick the code in and do more like just today." And then
That's
eventually
spite.
that really becomes like useless, right?
Yeah, then I just type it in, keep going, type it in, keep going.
Right.
I ask people, what's the hardest part of this? What piece can you get done the quickest? Um, what are you going to do when you get stalled? Because it happens to everybody. I had somebody last year said, I'm going to network more. And she went out, she joined 3 networking groups. And I was like, wow, that's a lot. Well, into February, first part of March, she got the flu. And then she was like, I think jumping back in, like, oh my gosh, those were a lot of meetings that I was going to. That's a lot right there. How can you break that down step by step? Was that actually what you wanted to do, or was that the way you thought you were satisfying the goal on there? So who's gonna be there to reach their hand out and lift you up? That hand, not hand out, but hand up when you're stuck. Who's gonna keep you accountable? Do you have visual reminders of this all the way around? Because if you answer that you don't have any of this thought out, do you really want it? That's the question I go back to. If we've not gotten to this part where you've thought all this out, is it something that you really want, or is it just a wish, a dream, a hope?
It's interesting you say that, and I'm gonna counter it because I do think that there are things that people really want. And I just think sometimes people don't have the knowledge that it takes more than just wanting something, which is why we do this podcast, right? Because in my clients, when I work with them, I know that there's things that people want, but they don't know that your brain is wired for safety. They don't know these tips and tricks that you're talking about, which is we talk about taking small steps. We talk about thinking about the roadblocks. We talk about really diving into the why. And it's interesting because one thing I want to sort of focus on is you've mentioned a couple times, but you haven't used this language, and that is how important the why is, right? So
That is
when that
it.
woman was like, I'm gonna network more, right? Great, great goal. But
Why?
if you aren't connected to the why behind the goal, and that's gotta be, and that why sometimes can change. Sometimes a surface level why is enough to take action, but sometimes you gotta get to that gut wrenching, tear jerking reason to do the thing. And sometimes that is really the thing you got to come back to. And so getting to like, if you had looked at the book thing, right, and you had dove into that, I'm going to guess that you would have, once you had really gotten to the why, you probably would have taken that off your list like three
I would
years
have.
before. Right. Because once
Just
you
move.
really dove down to the why, you would have seen that the end goal wasn't a book, but the end goal, because the why is like you really wanted to help women in this very specific way, right? And so I think that that's why the why is so important. And sometimes with my clients, I will keep like a toddler asking them why until we get to that emotional response. Because another small tip to this is that our brains really respond to emotions, right? Visualizations and emotions are how we're wired. And so the more that you can connect to the emotion behind it and the visual picture of it, the more likely you are to be able to complete the steps. Is that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. So the more pieces of this that somebody can put together, the more that they have thought this through. Also, it is working consciously and subconsciously because you are reinforcing that subconscious by your conscious actions over and over again. So you're helping build those pathways even when you're not trying to manifest, right? So when you're continually doing this, you're telling your brain, this is really important. This is super important to me. That may not be important to anybody else, but it's super important to me. And that's what your brain is going to be able to focus on. So 100%, it is important.
Yeah, and so just remember everybody, like resistance is normal. It's not gonna be super easy, but that doesn't mean that you can't dream, set goals, and do really big things. And it's just sort of knowing all these little tips and tricks, right? Knowing how your brain is wired, understanding the relationship between dreaming and manifesting and taking action and science behind the two things. And I think the more that you can put yourself in the framework of learning those things, whether it's joining something like G3, reading books on, what was it called? Mind Magic, is that another one, right?
Yep.
Or I haven't even said this, but like notes from your coach. My second book came out, and that's a 90-day journey to get yourself moving. And so that I'm just gonna publicize that. That would be another way to get yourself moving towards creating the goal you want, with the idea that you're doing a tiny thing every day to start to shift your brain, right? To start to change those neural pathways. And so the more that you can spend time doing those things, the more likely you are to be creating the life you want. And it is doable. I've seen people do amazing things. Olympians just don't wake up and say, one day I'm going to do this, right? It's a lot of hard work. Artists practice their craft. Like they don't just become amazing artists at one time. Business owners don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to build a business. They also do the work to get there. And so are there any last foods for thought that you want to leave our audience with today, Kat?
If you are a woman looking to make these changes, we've got another retreat coming up on the coastal Carolina area on January 16th through 18th, 2026. Go ahead and put it down. It'll be a place where you can meet with other people doing the exact same thing. So you can do hard things with other people doing hard things.
Yeah, and that it's emotional. It was emotional for me sitting down to do this work, and this is something I'm an expert in, and it was still, it doesn't make it easier necessarily. But I just want everyone to remember that manifesting really isn't just dreaming, right? It's aligning your mindset, your goals, your actions. So thank your brain for its focus, trust your vision, take the leap, and like you can absolutely do this. So as always, as you step back into your human journey, remember this week's unfiltered motivation. Create those opportunities for yourselves and don't just wait. You've got this. And in case you need a reminder, you're a badass. Keep rocking it. Until next time, stay true, stay empowered, stay resilient, and remember the power of the pivot, because life comes and goes and life keeps lifing. So if you want to contact me, you can go to my website, notesfromyourcoach.com. All my info is on the contact page. You can sign up for my monthly newsletter there. You can shoot me an email from there, but I'd love to connect and see what you got out of this. Until next time, bye y'all. Always remember that you are your greatest asset. For more notes from your coach with me, Queen of the Pivot, tune in every first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Each episode is chock full of unfiltered motivation to ignite your life and focuses on the tiny nugget of potent truth to empower you to take action and understand the power of the pivot. Share this show and share your journey using hashtag Notes from Your Coach. Subscribe and leave a review by visiting notesfromyourcoach.com.